Okay, so it's the top of the hour here on the East Coast, so we'll get started today. So thank you for joining me in today's webinar. Today we're going to talk about summary charts in FCS Express. Okay, so for those of you that might not be familiar with the recent release of our most current update of FCS Express 7, we've actually included several new plot types. And these plot types are different charts that you can use with the integrated spreadsheet that you can find in FCS Express. And for those of you that aren't necessarily familiar with these particular charts, basically what it is, there are different types of charts that allow you to basically use these charts to present and summarize the distribution of data that you're looking at. Okay, and typically we're talking about statistical data. Okay, so whether you're looking at percentages or if you're looking at the mean or median of various populations, you can actually use these summary charts as a way to graphically represent this information to your audience. And with these summary charts, what we've done is we've actually integrated so that way they're actually used in tandem with the integrated spreadsheets in an FCS Express layout. So with the current version of FCS Express that we have for version 7, version 708.018, what we've done is we've actually introduced 4 new chart types. And we're actually going to talk about them in detail today. Okay, so we've introduced the ability to add Levey Jennings charts in FCS Express. We have the ability to use Box and Whisker plots, and we've actually had that chart type for a while now, but it just made sense to actually present them all together with these other releases. So Violin and B-Swarm plots are also new to this recent release, okay? And typically these are charts that people would have used other softwares to actually get data to be represented graphically using these types of charts, okay? And the fact that we've integrated them directly into FCS Express, it basically means now you don't necessarily need to be an expert in R, Python, or MATLAB, or some of the other historical methods that people have used to actually create these charts. These are all integrated into FCS Express using the integrated spreadsheet, all looking directly at your data. Okay. So as we go along in today's webinar, please feel free to ask any questions through the questions section. We go to webinar control panel. I'm joined on the line by my colleague, Kaya Ghosh, who will answer questions as we go along through today's session. Okay. So the first plot type that I want to talk about is basically a Levey Jennings chart. Okay. So anyone that actually does any type of quality control within their lab, whether it's weekly, monthly, you probably use some type of Levey Jennings plot to basically represent the data, the trending of your quality control data over a given period of time for a cytometer. A Levey Jennings chart is a great way to do this because what it does, it'll show you the stability of that data over a given time course. Now, when you're looking at data in a Levey Jennings plot, there are typically various rules that can be used to basically display data points that are in control or out of control. Okay, and those are called the Westguard rules. And there are various Westguard rules to basically highlight different data points depending on how far away they are from the mean. The Levey Jennings plot basically displays a running average of data. Okay, and then it establishes either 1D, 2SD, 3SD ranges based off of that average. Using these Westguard rules, we could determine whether the data points that are being analyzed meet any of those rules and determine whether or not they're in control or out of control based off of those rules. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up an FCS Express layout to show you how we can actually use this to display this quality control data. Okay. So I have a template. With this template, I have an integrated spreadsheet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin by adding some data to our template. Make sure I'm filtering for the proper file type. I have about 20 files that I'm going to load into this layout. Okay, so this is obviously bead data. So we're looking at our beads and we're looking at median values for these bead peaks within different parameters of our cytometer. Okay, I have 20 files, so obviously what I'd like to do is I'd like to basically play this data through this template while capturing the median values for the bright peak in each of these channels. I've also gone ahead and inserted an integrated spreadsheet into this template, because what we're going to do is we're going to actually have FCS Express analyze data, this median peak data, within this spreadsheet, and we're going to draw our chart based off of the data that's in this spreadsheet. Okay, so for those of you that might not be familiar with the integrated spreadsheet, we have a number of videos that go over the details about how to use this integrated spreadsheet. I'm not necessarily going to talk about those details today, but just know that if you want to add data to its spreadsheet, you could do that in multiple ways. You can actually just drag a plot into one of these sheets. So if you want to extract statistical data or keyword data from the data that's in that plot, you could do that. If you drag a gate into one of these cells, you can extract statistical data from that gate, and you can simply just select either one stat or multiple stats for multiple gates, multiple quads, multiple markers, whatever it is that you have within your layout. And you can also drag and drop data files directly from the data list into this spreadsheet to populate that spreadsheet with the data, with statistics coming from those data files. Okay? All these different methods will work with this. However, what I also wanted to do is I wanted to take this opportunity to show a new batch processing feature that we've enabled in FCS Express that will allow you to export your data to an integrated spreadsheet directly in FCS Express. Okay. We'll have an upcoming webinar that's going to talk about some of the new features in FCS Express, specifically about this particular feature. But if I open up my batch actions window from my batch tab, you'll notice that with this current release, we now have a new report type called export to spreadsheet. And what this is going to do, it's going to allow me to export whatever stats, whatever keywords I've designated as part of that export to a specific spreadsheet in my layout. Okay, so I've actually added that here. I've specified where I want this to go, where I want to start writing the data in that spreadsheet. And I've also specified what information I want written to this spreadsheet through keywords and various statistics. Okay. So now what's going to happen is if I actually just run this batch, what FCS Express is going to do, it's going to play all 20 of these files through this template and capture those statistics and write them to this spreadsheet for me. Okay, so this is similar. This is a similar process as if you were exporting data to Excel or some type of third-party application. It's just simply done directly in FCS Express now. You don't have to worry about a third-party application to which FCS Express is going to be exporting. Okay, so I'm going to click on Run. You'll see that the software will play all 20 of these files through my layout and provide me statistics for that data. Okay, so now that I have this data, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a Levey Jennings chart to display that data. So all the chart types that we can insert into an FCS Express layout can be found from the Insert tab. Okay. The Levey Jennings option will be found underneath this 2D plot section underneath the Other category, where you can also find a number of other different chart types that you can use. I'm going to click on Levey Jennings. And I'm just going to draw that plot. Okay, so right away you'll see that FCS Express will display identification about your data on the x-axis versus a stat that's being measured across each of those samples. And right away you can see any trends that may be taking place with your data. So you can see how it is this Levey Jennings chart can be quite important and also provide you a lot of useful data rather easily. If you want to switch the stat that's being represented on the y-axis, you can simply just click on the y-axis and choose a different stat. And just remember that all these stats are being represented by whatever columns are being represented within that integrated spreadsheet that we mentioned earlier. Okay. Now this Levey Jennings chart can be formatted like any other object in FCS Express. Okay. So if you're familiar with how to format an object in FCS Express, basically, if you just right-click on that object, you'll see that there's a format option. Okay. And if I select that option, I'll get my format window. And I'll have various categories that I can format for that particular object. Okay, and a lot of these categories are also available for basically any plot type that you can select. So whether you want to edit the information that's in a title, or maybe add a legend, or format your axis scaling, or whatever it may be, you could do that with these plots, much like you would do with any other plot type in FCS Express. However, the bulk of the functionality that pertains to the Levey Jennings chart will be found from the overlays category. From the overlays category, this is where we can determine what the X and Y parameters are going to be, whether or not we want to connect the points, whether or not we want to show the markers and see which each data point is equal to. We can also format the look and feel of the shapes that are being displayed on this layout, on this particular chart. Okay, so you'll notice that there's a category for in control points and out of control points. Okay, so by default, we'll show all in control points as a rectangle, and we'll color it black. While all out of control points will be in the shape of a rectangle and colored red. You'll also notice that there's a line section that will allow me to format the various lines that are available in this Levey Jennings chart. So you probably noticed that when I inserted my Levey Jennings chart, there's a number of lines shown here by default. Okay, so let's talk about what each of these lines means. Okay, so first and foremost, we're going to have the line that shows what our running average is for the sequence of data points. Okay, so this line is actually shown in green. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to select it from this line section. I'm going to make this a little bit thicker just so we can see it. You also have the ability to change the style and the color if you wanted to. But you'll also notice that we'll have lines to show us one SD from that range. And that's highlighted by this blue dotted line. We'll have a 2 SD range, as well as a 3 SD range. FCS Express is going to determine what points of your data points are in control or out of control based off of the Westguard rules we've selected for this plot. Okay, so the Westguard rules are going to determine any of these points that may be in or out. Okay, so let's look a little bit more closely at these rules. So these rules are going to tell me either are any of my data points above or below plus or minus this 2 standard deviation of the mean? Are any of these data points plus or minus 3 standard deviations of the mean? Do I have 2 consecutive values that are either greater than or less than 2 standard deviations of the mean? Do I have one value that's plus 2 standard deviations from the mean and the following value that's less than 2 standard deviations of the mean? Or do I have 4 consecutive values greater than or less than 1 ST of the mean? And then finally, do I have 10 consecutive values all greater than or less than the mean? Why don't we select these all to see whether or not we actually have any out of control points. And you can see so far, everything looks fine. It's all hovering right around the mean. None of these points actually satisfy any of these Westguard rules. Let's go to another parameter. Okay, so now that we've switched to our FTSE median, you can see that our FTSE is pretty much on a downward trend. So much so that the last 12 data points actually fall below that mean value. Okay, and that last Westguard rule will actually highlight any out of control points if it turns out you have either 10 more consecutive values all greater than or less than the mean. Okay, so if I actually wanted to emphasize these, I can select my out of control point underneath the shapes option. I can change the shape. I can change the color. Maybe I actually want to make these bigger to emphasize this, where maybe is I change the in control point to another color and increase the size of that just to emphasize that data too. So now what I could do is let me format this. I'm gonna actually just kind of duplicate this plot. And I can make as many copies of this plot as I wanted to, okay, to display all the different parameters that have been collected for my data set. Now this is important because now what I could do is I could save this as a template with the data embedded within this layout. So let's say this was a template that I've created for the month of August to look at my QC data. Maybe I had some new data files that I wanted to run through this and simply append to this list. Well, let's do that. So I'm going to open up my data list. I'm going to grab some new data. Again, we're going to make sure that we're filtering for the proper file type. So I have another 20 files that I want to add to this list. By displaying the file in which I want to start my batch, I can come in and adjust that internal spreadsheet export to start writing at column A, but to start at the first row available. And I don't necessarily want to write the rows or column labels either. I basically just wanted to append to this list. So now if I run this, you'll see it will add on the next 20, as well as updating the charts for me with those new data points. Okay, so again, if I have any new in control or out of control points, you should be able to see that immediately based off of whatever rules you've selected for that plot. Okay, so in the meantime, the running average will automatically update. The 1 SD, the 2 SD, the 3 SD range will automatically update. And any of the corresponding Westguard rules will update as the data points are added to that plot. Okay, very convenient. Really nice that this is all integrated within one software package to give you immediate feedback as soon as you add data to that spreadsheet. Okay. Again, if there are any questions so far as we go along, please feel free to enter them in the questions section if you go to Webinar Control Panel. The next chart type I want to talk about is called Box and Whisker Plots. And what a Box and Whisker plot is, it's a chart that shows you the basic distribution of your statistical data according to quartiles. Okay, so what's going on is that FCS Express is actually going to draw this plot with whatever data you have selected to draw for this plot, and it's going to determine what the first quartile, the second quartile, third quartile, and the fourth quartile are depending on the range of data. Okay, and what happens is that FCS Express will draw a box around that middle 50% and draw what we call whiskers around the two outer quartiles. Okay, this Box and Whisker Plots is a useful tool for looking at summary stats, but the one issue is that it's not particularly useful for seeing variations in your data. Okay, and we'll actually talk about a choice that you could use later on if you are looking for variations of data, or maybe you're dealing with multimodal data where you need some type of chart type that better responds to that. Okay, so this is a layout I've created where we have some data, basically 84 data points, where I've gone through the process and fed all 84 of these files into this integrated spreadsheet, much like you've seen earlier with the Levey Jennings chart. And from this data, I'm extracting various keywords, various statistics, anything that I need that I might want to use in displaying data in my Box and Whiskers plot. So I have various keywords. I have some category keywords to look at maybe different time points. I have some group keywords to determine whether or not the data that I'm analyzing is either a control or a sample. Maybe I'm interested in knowing whether any of these samples are from a male or a female. And finally, whatever the sample ID is for each one of these. Okay. And again, just like before with the Levey Jennings, I've done that just by exporting to an internal spreadsheet and specifying what information I want to be exported to this particular sheet. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to take that data and we're going to create a Box and Whiskers plot out of it. And just to summarize what a Box and Whiskers plot is, again, it's going to look at that data that we selected and it's going to draw a box around that middle 50%. Okay, so that's second and third quartiles that are within that data. Okay, it's going to base it off the median, the 50th percentile, and then it's going to draw the whiskers based off of the outer quartiles. Okay, so the whiskers are going to be capped by the minimum and maximum values that are found in that data set. Okay, so this is a great way to look at variability outside of that middle quartile. Okay, and we typically refer to that middle 50% as the IQR, or the interquartile range. Okay, and the idea is that basically any point outside the whiskers using this type of chart is considered an outlier. To draw this chart, again, we're going to go back to the Insert tab like we did with our Levey Jennings. Underneath the chart section, you'll see that there's a summary button, where if we click that, you'll see that there's a Box and Whiskers option. If we select that, we'll draw it like we did last time. And right away, you'll see that FCS Express will draw a set of Box and Whiskers for various categories or groups that I have in my data set that's specified in that spreadsheet. Okay, so we have along the x-axis here, we have identification for whatever category or group of data I'm looking at, whereas along the y, I'm looking at various statistics. Again, these are all outlined. These are all different columns that were specified within that spreadsheet that we saw on the first page. I can update that simply just by clicking on the statistic that I want, and you see how the data automatically updates to adjust to that column of data. Okay. So much like before, how we did with the Levey Jennings chart, or really any object in FCS Express, if we want to format this object, if we just right-click on it, you'll see that there's a format option. And again, much like any other object, we can format any aspect of this object. So whether we want to format the axes, the X or Y axes, or if we want to format the information that's in the title, or put a border around this, or again, any of the same categories you could find in other objects. Or maybe rather than have this as a vertical display, maybe you want this as a horizontal display. The bulk of the formatting for a Box and Whiskers plot is going to be found from the overlays category. Okay. So from this category, we'll be able to decide what's the category in which we're basically separating all our data into. Do we want to use these time points as a category? Maybe we want to just simply look at what's our control and what's our sample. And if we are going to break it into control and sample, do we want to use another subdivision to break it down even further, where we're looking at each of our time points, and then we're looking at the control and the sample for each time point. Now, like we did with the Levey Jennings chart, you'll see that there's a section where we can modify the different shapes and lines that are available with these particular graphs. Okay. So with the Box and Whiskers plot, what we can do is we can modify the look and feel of the box. Okay, so again, that box is looking at the middle 50% of our data. Okay, so the second and third quartiles. And by default, we make this a rectangle. However, you can come in, you can change the shape, you can make it whatever you want. Also, if you want to provide some type of coloring, what we could do is we can just simply click on the color drop-down menu and add some color to it as well. Within this drop-down menu, you'll also notice that there's a button for a color parameter. And what this is actually referring to the color parameter as part of the overlay options, where if you happen to have a column that specifies a color for each group type, then what you can do is you can actually select it. Okay, in this case, all my controls are colored red, all my samples are colored green. I can come in, I can change the shape, the look and feel of non-outliers, mild outliers, extreme outliers. I can also add a point to show where the mean is or the median. Okay. So by default, you'll see that when we select these shapes, we don't necessarily show them, but we can simply just come in, select a shape. And now since I've selected a left triangle, you can actually see how a left triangle will show up in the box of my Box and Whiskers. And I'm just actually going to make this a little bit bigger, just so we can see where that shape is, where the mean point is of that data set. So again, the arithmetic mean, the average. We can also show a shape for the median point if we want to, but you'll see that what we do here is we actually show a line to show the median by default, okay? And the lines below will allow us to format the look and feel of the lines being used in this Box and Whiskers plot. So for example, if we wanted to increase the size of the border of that box, we can do that. If you wanted to format the lines of the box and of the whiskers, we can do that. Or maybe you want to change the pattern or the color that's used, you can do that too. Or we can also add a line to show where the mean or median is, just by selecting that option, selecting the style, and showing the color. So here, I'm actually going to make this pink. And just so we can see a little bit better, I'm going to increase the size of it so that way we can actually see where that line is. So below the section where we can edit the lines and the shapes, this is also a section where we can format how FCS Express treats the outlier options, okay? So if we actually rather have FCS Express draw the box based off a percentile, then we can choose that option. And then we would determine what the percentile is going to be for mild outliers as well as the extreme outliers. And then you can just simply type in the numbers that you would expect to see or you'd want to see for those upper and lower percentiles. For the interquartile range factor, then we can simply just type in the number that we want to see if we actually want to expand this range or minimize it. We have some whisker options where we can have FCS Express draw the whisker to the minimum maximum value of the data set, or we can have the software draw the whiskers to the farthest point of the data set that's not a mild outlier. In this case, they just happen to be the same option. These the kernel density estimate options we'll actually talk about coming up, because this will actually refer to another chart type that we now offer called the Violin Plots, and we'll talk that coming up in the next section. Okay, so you can see right away, I can get quite a bit of information of my statistical data from these Box and Whiskers plots. I can see the distribution of the data. I can see where my mean or median point is. I can see basically what's the 50% of my data around that point, okay, around the median. And again, I do have the ability where if I want to group my data, I could do that. And you can see how the software will actually group that data for you. So it's really a great graphical display. And as with any other object, if I wanted to export this, save this particular plot as an image, I can do that. Or if I wanted to export this layout to either PDF or PowerPoint, I can still do that. All these options that we've come to know and expect from FCS Express are still available to all our users. Okay. Again, if there are any questions, please feel free to enter those questions into the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel. Okay. So as I mentioned, the Box and Whiskers plot is a great way to look at the basic distribution of our statistical data. However, it's not really that great of a tool to use if you're looking for the full distribution of your data. Let's say you're dealing with multimodal data. Okay, that's where a violin plot comes in. So a violin plot is another chart type that we now offer in our current release of FCS Express 7. And the violin plot does offer many of the same characteristics of a Box and Whiskers plot. It can still show the mean or median. It can just basically still show that IQR, the interquartile range. That can still show outliers of a particular data set. Where it has the advantage over a Box and Whiskers plot is that the violin plot will actually shape itself according to that statistical data, where you'll see that the violin plot will have wider sections and some narrower or thinner sections, where the points in each of those sections represent either a higher or lower probability that the members of those populations will take on a given value. Okay, and just to kind of illustrate this before we actually go directly into FCS Express to look at this data, the whole process is actually occurring through a kernel density estimation where we're creating a smooth histogram of our statistical data. From that smooth histogram, we're creating a mirror image, and then we're basically putting the two together, giving us our violin shape. From the shape, again, we could still look at it and look at it in terms of the same type of information that we can get from a Box and Whiskers, because that's essentially what's going on here. But you'll notice that we have now this curvature, this histogram effect to it, where we can actually see where the most of our data is, or where events that might have a lower probability of being similar data points fall within this histogram, within this violin plot. Okay, so the violin plot does provide an added advantage of how you actually display that data and how you might want to emphasize and represent that data. Okay. And if we look at this plot option in FCS Express, you'll notice that it's all integrated and contained within FCS Express, much like any of our charts. Okay. So again, a violin plot is ideal for multimodal use. We can still get our mean or median information out of this data. We can look at the IQR. But what we can also do in addition to all this is we can show what we call split categories. So maybe you're looking at a particular data set and maybe you actually want to split it up into what percentage or what distribution of my data is male, what part is my female response, whatever it may be of that data set. Okay. So I have a similar data set here that we worked with the Box and Whiskers plot. And what we're going to do is we're going to insert a violin plot from the same place where we insert the Box and Whiskers plot. So I'm just going to select that option. And again, I'm just going to draw it. Okay, and you'll see right away what I mean by the violin. The name violin just comes from how the shapes that can occur from your data can have a tendency to look like a violin. Okay, so we can select the category option on the x-axis. So maybe we actually want to show one option or another, maybe like we did with the Box and Whisker plots, where we're just simply interested in our control and our sample. Or maybe we actually want to look at all the different time points and how those stack up against one another. The y-axis will show us whatever stat we're interested in. So we're looking at the response from one drug or another, or some other type of stat that's being used as a representation. Again, from our Format tab, we'll still be able to format this plot like any other object. But we're going to access the full functionality of this plot, again, from the Overlays category, much like we did for the Box and Whiskers and Levey Jennings plot. So from this category, again, we can select the from this option, we can select the category, how we want to group our data, if we want to choose a color parameter. But you'll notice what's new here is that there's this option called Split Violin Parameter. Okay, This will allow me to actually split my violin based off of another bit of information. So for example, if I'm interested in seeing the response from a male population or the response from a female population, for example, how does that interact with my data? And as part of that parameter, what we can do is we can actually color those splits based off of another column coming from our spreadsheet. So with my spreadsheet, I exported another keyword where I called it split color. I can select that column. And what I can do is I can actually color that column for my second violin based off of that color parameter. Okay. So here are different colors to represent the different distribution of our data for each of these time points, and depending on the sex of the population, as an example. Okay. Now, I also have the ability to overlay a box on this if I actually want to see where that IQR is. Okay, so if I select the box option, by default, we don't show it, but we can simply just make it visible and choose a color that we want to display that. And you'll see how we get that impression within our violin plot. Okay. I can increase the size or decrease the size as I want. If I want to show the whiskers, I can simply just turn that on. And you can see how I can enable that as part of this display. And much like we did with our box and whiskers plot, if I want to show a line for my mean or median, I can choose that option, whatever color I want. And then I can see that in there. Let me see if I could pick another color to make it stand out a little bit better. Okay. So a lot of tools that help you represent the data that you're looking for specifically. So we do still have the ability to adjust for outlier options. So again, if we wanted to use the interquartile range factor as a way to determine outliers, or if we want to base that off of percentile, we can select either of those options and then just determine what those cutoffs are going to be. And the same thing with the whisker options of how FCS Express is going to draw those whisker options, whether we're doing it to the minimum or the maximum of the data set, or if we're simply just going to draw the whiskers to the farthest point in the data that's not a mild outlier. But an additional feature for these violin plots is the ability to alter the kernel density estimate options. Okay, so we could change the resolution of these plots of the violin curves. Okay, let's say we actually wanted to make these a little bit blockier. We can actually drop this where you kind of lose the curvature of the violin plot. Or we could adjust the bandwidth, where we actually do an estimated bandwidth where the software will automatically calculate the curvature, or if we simply just want to override that and provide our own curvature, where maybe we want to make it a little bit smoother, maybe not as jagged or as rounded or as curvy as it was previously. What we can also do is we can enable what we call a clamp option. And what that is, it's basically a way that we can actually truncate data on the lower end and on the high end, a minimum and a maximum, where the software will automatically calculate that based off of the range of data, or we can actually come in and override that. So if I actually wanted to truncate on the lower end, maybe start at a value of 10 and maybe clamp it on the other end where I have a value of 50, and then just have the software calculate a violin plot or a violin curve based off of that clamp range, I could do that using these tools. Okay, again, all integrated into the software, really no need to actually jump to a third-party software to get this. Much like we did with the other plots, if you need to export this or save these as images, export them to PowerPoint, PDF, these are all available directly within FCS Express that you could use as part of your routine workflow. Okay. Again, if there are any questions, please feel free to enter those questions in the questions section. We go to webinar control panel. And the last chart type that I want to talk about today is a chart called a B-swarm plot. Okay, so as you could probably tell, all these plots, these chart types, have similarities to one another. The B-swarm plot is very similar to a violin plot, except that the individual data points are displayed on a 1D scatter plot, and we use dots to represent the data points. And the reason why it gets this name, as you could probably imagine, is that the dots, provided that there's enough of them, actually will give the appearance of a swarm of bees. So much like the violin plot, the reason why this would be useful and advantageous to you is if you're looking to visualize the full distribution of your data, or if you're dealing with multimodal data. Okay, and again, dealing with a similar data set. If I go back to Insert, Summary, you'll see there's our B-swarm chart option, where if I click on that, and I draw it, this B-swarm plot will represent my data, where each data point are individual dots. Okay, and this is all represented in a scatter plot. Okay. So again, like before, this is all information that's coming from my spreadsheet. I can change the axes if I want to display multiple plots to represent what's going on in my data set. I can do that. I can format these. And again, the bulk of the functionality is going to come from the overlays category. Okay. Now, what's interesting here with the B-swarm plot is, again, we can add characteristics that basically combine everything that we would see from a Box and Whiskers plot as well as a violin plot. Okay, and the way we could do that is simply just by, I can format these both at the same time just by selecting them. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make our box visible. We'll make it pink. I'll show my whiskers. I'm going to show my median line. Okay, and I'm going to show my mean line as well, just so we can compare the two. Okay, so again, you have the ability to look at the B-swarm dots to show each of the data points. I can apply a box to look at the distribution of that data so I can actually have a better visual to further emphasize this. But I can also add the curvature that I would see with the violin plot. So within my shapes, if I select violin, I can just show that. And again, you'll see how the shapes will automatically kick in. For the violin, I'll still have the same options that we would see below, where maybe I actually want to format one of these where I adjust the clamp and I can determine what the minimum and maximum range is for my truncated data. Okay, very useful, all built into the software directly. Very easy to use and very easy to integrate into your current workflow. Okay, that's pretty much all we have to show you today. So just to summarize, these summary charts can be used to summarize and visualize your flow or image cytometry data according to the mean or median of your data. And then as I mentioned, these charts are directly integrated into FCS Express and they work directly with data through an integrated spreadsheet. And however you want to populate that spreadsheet in FCS Express, that's up to you. But for those of you that are familiar with the functionality of our spreadsheet, you know that you can just drag and drop different data points into that spreadsheet. You can drag and drop data files into that spreadsheet and then select the information that you want from that spreadsheet. Or you could use the new Export to Spreadsheet Batch Action tool. And then viewing all the different charts that we've seen today, you can see that we can format these charts in multiple ways to basically emphasize the point that you're trying to make from the data that's in these charts. Okay, and the beauty is that by integrating this directly in FCS Express, you should be able to retain the same features and functions that help streamline your routine workflow in FCS Express. Okay, so I'd like to thank you all today for joining me. If you haven't already, please feel free to download a free 30-day demo of FCS Express from our website. You can visit us at www.denovosoftware.com, or you can contact us directly through email at support@denovosoftware.com with any questions you may have. Okay, I'll stay on the line for a couple minutes to answer any questions that come up. Otherwise, thank you for joining us, and I hope you have a great day.